My own son texted me, "You won't be joining us. My wife prefers to keep it just family." Just family after I had paid every dollar for the house they lived in. Do you know what it feels like to be erased from your own bloodline? I had given up my savings, my home, my future, believing sacrifice would bind us together. Instead, I became disposable. But while they boarded a cruise I was excluded from, I held the deed in my hands. They thought I was powerless. They thought I would stay quiet. They had no idea what silence can do. I used to believe that sacrifice was a kind of currency. You give enough of yourself, your time, your body, your savings, and in return, love would stay. Loyalty would hold. Respect would be inevitable. That belief carried me through most of my life, long after the world had stopped clapping for women like me. When Michael was just 10, his father died suddenly on a job site. One moment, I was making meatloaf, humming to the radio. The next, I was a widow with a boy who still cried when the nightlight flickered. I was 32 and terrified, but I had no time for terror. There were bills, a mortgage, and a child who needed braces. Grief had to sit quietly while I scrubbed floors and taught evening classes just to keep us afloat. I worked 2 jobs, sometimes 3. By day, I taught elementary school. 30 pairs of eyes depending on me to spell out futures on a chalkboard. By night, I waited tables in a diner off Route 9, pouring coffee for truckers who barely saw me as human. On weekends, I cleaned houses for families who could afford what I never would. My hands ached, my back throbbed. But when Michael slept soundly in his bed, I told myself it was worth it. Men came knocking, of course. A widow in her 30s doesn't stay unnoticed long, but every time a smile lingered too long or a dinner invitation felt too hopeful, I remembered Michael's small hand gripping mine at his father's funeral. "Just us now, Mom," he had whispered, his voice trembling. That was enough to slam every door shut. I told myself I would not gamble his security on my loneliness. Better to remain alone than to risk bringing in someone who would not love him as his father had. Years bled into decades. I aged quietly, my hair silvering before I even noticed. The only thing that mattered was Michael's future. When college came, I sold my jewelry, cashed out a modest retirement account, and told him not to worry about tuition. "Focus on your studies," I insisted, even as I swallowed my own fear of never having enough for myself. I stitched the world together with coupons, late-night grading, and a faith that my boy would remember who built the bridge he walked on. After he married Vanessa, I thought, finally, I could breathe. He had a career, a partner, a chance to live without the shadow of my sacrifices. Vanessa was beautiful, sharp-tongued but ambitious. I believed she would care for him, maybe even appreciate me for what I had given. That illusion lasted until the night they hinted at wanting a forever home. Michael explained how the banks were difficult, how their loan applications kept stalling. He said the words carefully, like he was handling fragile glass. "We just need some help, Mom, just until everything clears." I had one thing left, a small apartment, the last piece of property with my name on it. It wasn't much, but it was mine, proof that my life had been built on more than sacrifice. Selling it felt like pulling out the last brick holding up the wall of myself. But when I looked at Michael, I didn't see a man of 35. I saw the boy who once held my hand at his father's grave, whispering, "Just us now." So I sold it. Every dollar went into the down payment for their new house. The realtor handed me papers that smelled faintly of ink and permanence, and I signed my name as if I were writing my own obituary. Then, standing in the echoing kitchen of that pristine home, I placed the keys into Michael's palm. For a brief second, his eyes softened. He hugged me, whispered, "Thank you, Mom. You've always been there." It was the kind of gratitude I had starved for, and I wanted to believe it would last. But then I glanced at Vanessa. Her face was composed, lips stretched into what anyone else would call a smile. But I saw it. The flicker of triumph, not gratitude. The tilt of her chin was not, "Thank you," it was finally. Not relief, but conquest. The air shifted in that moment, though no one spoke of it. I told myself I imagined it. That exhaustion was playing tricks on me. Yet the image burned, her eyes glittering like someone who had won a silent battle. That night, alone in my small rented room, I stared at my empty dresser and asked myself a question I wasn't ready to answer. What if they didn't want me? Only what I could give? I had handed over my last shield, the final piece of myself I thought was untouchable. And as the silence pressed in around me, I couldn't shake the chill that maybe, just maybe, I had traded more than property. Maybe I had given away the last proof that I belonged. Have you ever poured everything into someone, only to wonder if they ever saw you, or if all they saw was what you could provide? That thought kept me awake, long past midnight, and though I didn't know it then, the look in Vanessa's eyes would haunt me long after the papers were signed. I had packed carefully, folding my clothes with a kind of tenderness, as if the trip ahead was a gift for me, as much as it was for them. I had bought a new sun hat, wide-brimmed and soft, the first indulgence I'd allowed myself in years. I imagined the ocean breeze, the laughter of my grandchildren splashing on the shore, the warmth of belonging. It felt like a promise, a reminder that maybe my sacrifices hadn't been forgotten. The phone buzzed on the nightstand. I wiped my hands on the edge of my skirt and reached for it, smiling because I expected Michael's voice or a cheerful reminder about departure time. Instead, it was a text, just one line. "You won't be joining us. Vanessa prefers to keep it just family." I read it twice, then a third time, the words blurring into one another. Just family. My son had typed those words as if they were harmless, casual, like commenting on the weather. But in those two words, he had drawn a line with a blade so sharp it cut deeper than death. Just family, excluding me, his own mother, the woman who had poured her entire life into making sure he had one. My hands began to shake. I dialed him immediately, my chest pounding with a fear I hadn't felt since the night his father died. The line rang, once, twice, then silence. He didn't pick up. I tried again, desperate to hear his voice, to believe there had been a mistake, that the words had been clumsy. Again, no answer. Then the phone buzzed in my hand, a message, not from Michael, from Vanessa. It was just an emoji, a smiling face, tilted as if mocking me. That was the moment the air seemed to leave the room. I sank into the chair by the window, my fingers gripping the phone so tightly I thought the glass might crack. My suitcase sat beside me, zipped and waiting, a silent witness to the rejection that had just been handed to me. I had imagined this trip as a chance to breathe, to laugh with them, to remind myself I still had a place in their world. Instead, I sat staring at the suitcase like it belonged to a stranger. My reflection in the window looked foreign, hollow. The sun slipped lower, casting long shadows across the carpet. I didn't cry. Not at first. I simply sat, listening to the blood rush in my ears, trying to understand how a mother becomes an outsider in her own family. I thought of all the nights I had gone without sleep so Michael could rest, the birthdays I had scrimped to celebrate, the house I had signed away to give him a future. And now, with one text, I was erased. Have you ever been made to feel like a guest in a life you built with your own hands? Tell me honestly, if your child told you that you were not family, would you stay silent or would you fight? The phone buzzed again, this time with a group message. Photos began to appear. Vanessa smiling in a sunlit dress, Michael with his arm around her waist, the children holding brightly colored beach toys. The caption read, "Family trip begins." I stared at the images until my eyes burned. The word family glared at me like a neon sign. They looked happy, complete, and I was nowhere in the frame. I pressed the phone to my chest, my breathing shallow. For a moment, anger rose hot, demanding I reply, demanding I remind them whose money had built the walls behind them, whose sweat had carved the path they now walked. but the words would not come. Instead, a hollow silence settled over me, heavier than any scream. I unzipped the suitcase slowly, each sound sharp in the quiet. One by one, I removed the folded dresses, the carefully packed shoes, the sun hat. I placed them back in the dresser, each movement mechanical, as though I were erasing myself from the trip before they could erase me again. When the last item was put away, I sat on the edge of the bed and let the tears come. They weren't loud. They weren't even bitter. They were quiet, like rain against a window, steady, unstoppable, and unseen. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept hearing the words on repeat, just family. Each time they echoed, the meaning deepened. Not an invitation withheld, not a miscommunication. It was a truth they had been waiting to reveal. I was not family, not to them, not anymore. Morning light bled into the room, pale and unwelcoming. My phone buzzed with more photos. The ship, the ocean, the children giggling. Vanessa's captions were full of hearts and exclamation marks. Michael didn't send a word. I placed the phone face down. I no longer wanted to see the proof. I already knew. Some wounds don't bleed where others can see them. They open inside you, quietly, until you realize you've been hollowed out by people who once swore to love you. That day, sitting by the window with the unopened suitcase, I realized something I'd tried to deny for years. Love doesn't guarantee gratitude. Blood doesn't guarantee belonging. And for the first time, I wondered if silence might be my only weapon. The house was too quiet without them. Their laughter, even when it cut through me, had at least been proof of life. Now with Michael and Vanessa gone on their glittering cruise, silence pressed down like a weight. I wandered from room to room, the walls echoing with the ghosts of my sacrifices. Every corner whispered what I had traded, what I had given. In the living room, I ran my hand along the mantel. The photos there told a story, but not mine. Vanessa had arranged them carefully, smiling family portraits that excluded me, vacations where I was not invited, milestones where I was only the invisible hand behind the scenes. I traced the edge of one frame, remembering how many hours I had worked to afford that very house, yet my face had no place among theirs. I moved into the kitchen, the heart of the home. My home, though it didn't feel that way anymore. The tiled floor gleamed under the morning light, a shine bought with my labor. I remembered cutting coupons to stretch groceries, skipping meals so Michael could eat better. Every dollar, every sacrifice was poured into the foundation of these walls. And then, on the counter, I saw it. A folder left open, papers spread like fallen leaves. At first, I thought it was ordinary. Bills, maybe, or schedules. But when I looked closer, my breath caught. Bank documents, loan applications. And there, on the signature line, was my name. My handwriting, except it wasn't mine. The letters mimicked my hand, the curve of the E just off, the loop of the C too wide. Michael and Vanessa had forged my signature. They were planning to use my name, my credit, my life, to dig themselves deeper into debt. The room tilted. I gripped the edge of the counter to steady myself. My heart thudded in my chest, not from age, not from frailty, but from a betrayal so sharp it stole the air from my lungs. It wasn't enough that they had cast me aside, excluded me from their family. Now they were using me, my existence, my name, as collateral for their comfort. I sat down heavily at the table, the papers trembling in my hands. Betrayal has a taste. It's metallic, bitter, like blood at the back of your throat. I had felt invisible before. Now I felt violated. I thought of Michael as a boy, running home with scraped knees, crying for me to make it better. I remembered the nights I stayed up sewing patches on his worn backpack so he wouldn't feel ashamed at school. I remembered his voice, breaking with gratitude when I first handed him the keys to this house. And now, here was the truth. I was not a mother to him anymore. I was a resource, a line of credit, a signature to exploit. Do you know what it feels like to realize you are no longer loved, only used? Have you ever woken up and seen with sickening clarity that you are not cherished? You are consumed? The house seemed to close in on me then, the walls pressing tighter as if mocking me. The air was too still, too heavy. I stood, pacing, my mind spiraling through decades of sacrifice. For what? To be erased from their vacations, their photos, their definition of family? To be left behind while they smiled in the sun? To be reduced to a forged signature on a bank form? A laugh slipped out, sharp, humorless, bitter. The sound startled even me. It cracked through the empty kitchen like breaking glass. I pressed the papers flat against the counter and whispered to no one but the walls. So that's what I am to you. Not a mother, just a walking wallet, a gold mine you think won't run dry. I leaned back in the chair, staring at the ceiling. For the first time, I felt no urge to cry. The tears had dried into something else, something harder. I folded the papers carefully, slid them back into the folder, and left it exactly where I found it. Let them believe their secret was safe. Let them think I was blind, frail, powerless. That illusion would be the only comfort they'd have left. The house groaned with the sound of settling wood, but to me it felt like a tomb. These walls had become my mausoleum, built with the bones of my sacrifices. Every photo, every receipt, every corner was proof of a life given, never returned. I walked back into the living room and lowered myself into the armchair. My hands rested on my knees, still trembling, but my eyes were dry. I whispered again, this time louder, the words cutting through the silence. Not a mother, just a gold mine on legs. Have you ever felt it? That moment when the scales fall from your eyes and you finally see the truth? If you have, if you've ever been used instead of loved, leave just a single dot, because sometimes that's all you can manage when the truth rips you open. And in that house, now more grave than home, I understood. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had buried me. The night after I discovered the forged papers, I could not sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hollow silence that filled the house. Each creak of the wood sounded like a whisper of betrayal. My body ached with exhaustion, but my mind refused to rest. I kept replaying the moments in my head, Michael's laughter as a child, his tears at his father's funeral, the first time he told me, "Thank you, Mom," with a voice thick with sincerity. I asked myself over and over how that boy had grown into a man capable of using me like this. By morning, I felt drained, empty. I moved through the house like a shadow, touching surfaces as if they belonged to someone else. The kitchen, the living room, the hallway, all spaces I had built with sweat and sacrifice. Now they pressed in on me, suffocating. I was ready in that moment to give up, to simply let them have it all, to vanish into the background like the ghost they had already made me. It was in that state, half gone, half alive, that I opened the old hall closet, searching for a blanket to wrap myself in. My hands brushed against a box, shoved to the back, covered in dust. I pulled it out, surprised by its weight, and carried it to the table. When I opened it, the scent of old paper drifted up, mingling with memory. Inside was my husband's journal. My breath caught. I had thought I'd lost it years ago in one of the many moves, but here it was, waiting for me in the shadows. My hands trembled as I opened the worn leather cover. His handwriting, strong but slightly tilted, sprawled across the yellowed pages. I read through them slowly, each entry a window back into a time when life was simpler, when love was certain. He wrote about Michael's first steps, the way I laughed when I thought no one was listening, the long hours he worked to keep us safe. Every page was a reminder that once I had been seen. Once I had been cherished. Then I reached the last page. The ink was faded but clear, the words steady, as if he had known they were meant to last. If the day comes when even your own blood turns from you, do not break. You have built a world from your two hands before, and you can build yourself again. Do not let them erase you. The words hit me like a wave. My chest tightened, not with grief, but with something else, resolve. He had written this for me. He had known in some quiet way that life might one day test me beyond endurance. And he had left me this, his voice in the dark, urging me not to surrender. As I closed the journal, something slipped from the back cover, a folded piece of paper, brittle with age. I unfolded it carefully, my eyes scanning the words. A property transfer, legal, official. The house deed, solely in my name. Michael had no legal claim, no power. They had built their lives under this roof only because I had allowed it. Legally, it was mine and mine alone. For a long moment, I sat frozen, the paper trembling in my hands. Then, slowly, the truth sank in. I was not powerless. They could exclude me, erase me from photos, mock me with smiling emojis, but they could not take this house, not without my consent. And my consent had ended the moment they turned me into nothing more than a signature to exploit. I felt something stir inside me. Not anger, it was sharper than that. Not grief, it was steadier. It was a rising sense of control, of possibility. I had been living like a ghost in this place, but suddenly I realized I was the one holding the keys to their comfort. I looked around the kitchen again, at the chairs they sat in, the table they ate at, the very walls that kept them safe. None of it belonged to them, not legally, not truly. It was mine, all mine. A laugh rose in my throat, soft at first, then fuller, until it filled the quiet house. This time, it wasn't bitter. It was the sound of recognition, of remembering who I was. I slid the deed back into the journal, closed the leather cover, and placed it gently in the drawer of the side table. My hand lingered on the wood, steady, calm. I whispered into the stillness, my voice carrying through the house like a vow. All right, enjoy this trip. Enjoy it well, because it will be your last time in this house. The silence that followed was not suffocating anymore. It was electric, alive, brimming with possibility. Have you ever felt that moment when the weight lifts, when pain becomes power, when the betrayal that almost broke you suddenly sharpens into clarity? If you have, you know what it means to smile in the dark, knowing you hold the final card. While Michael and Vanessa filled their social media feeds with bright photos of the cruise ship and the sparkling blue of the ocean, I sat at the old dining table with a pen in my hand. Their smiles beamed from the screen, the children clutching ice cream cones, Vanessa in her new sunglasses, Michael grinning as if he had never once sent a text that cut his mother from his life. Each image felt like salt pressed into an open wound, but I did not flinch this time. Instead, I signed the papers in front of me with a steady hand. The realtor across the table glanced up, confirming every page. Her tone was calm, professional, but when she saw the slight tremor in my fingers, she softened. "It's never easy letting go of a house," she said. I nodded without explaining that I wasn't just letting go, I was taking back years of dignity they had stolen, reclaiming the roof they thought they could own. By the time my signature dried, the house was no longer mine to grieve over. It had become a transaction, one I had chosen, not one forced upon me. A quiet power hummed in my chest, replacing the emptiness that had lived there for too long. The twist I hadn't expected came the day I met the buyers. A young couple, hardly older than Michael and Vanessa, walked through the house with eyes full of wonder. Their daughter, no more than 8, ran her hand along the banister, whispering, "It feels like home." The mother looked at me with a small, nervous smile. "We've been saving for years. We didn't think we'd ever find a place like this." Something inside me eased. They weren't vultures circling what they could take. They weren't looking at me as a resource, a signature, or a wallet. They were simply a family, desperate for a safe space to belong. I watched as the little girl peeked into the kitchen, her eyes shining as though she could already smell Sunday pancakes in the air. And for the first time in a long time, I felt I was passing something on, not as a burden, not as a duty, but as a gift freely given. When the final handshake was done, I closed the door one last time and walked away. No tears followed me, only relief. I used part of the money to rent a small apartment downtown. It wasn't grand. 2 rooms, a modest kitchen, a window overlooking a quiet street, but it was mine, entirely mine. That first evening, I unpacked a single box, set a teapot on the stove, and sat by the window as steam curled into the air. The silence here was different, not heavy, not suffocating. It was light, gentle, filled with possibility. I cupped the warm mug in my hands and let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding for years. Alone, yes, but not lonely. For the first time in decades, I wasn't filling a role, wasn't giving until I had nothing left. I was simply existing, and that was enough. Outside, the city hummed faintly, but inside, peace settled around me like a blanket. My thoughts didn't spiral to betrayal or loss. Instead, I thought of my husband's words in that journal. You can build yourself again. Sitting there with tea on my tongue and no one demanding more, I realized I already had. It struck me then, silence could scream louder than any accusation. I hadn't confronted Michael or Vanessa, hadn't shouted or begged. I had simply acted, and in doing so, I had spoken the clearest truth of my life. Do you believe silence can be the strongest answer? Tell me, have you ever chosen to walk away instead of fight, and in doing so, found your freedom? The phone buzzed on the table beside me. I ignored it at first, savoring my tea, but curiosity won. It was another photo from Michael, the cruise again, the family again. Their captions rang with joy. Yet as I looked at it, I no longer felt the sting. They could have their staged happiness. I had something better, peace they would never understand. I placed the phone face down, leaned back in my chair, and let the quiet stretch around me. Somewhere out there, my son believed he had secured his future, believed he could keep me at the margins. He had no idea that the ground beneath him was already gone. I smiled faintly, whispering into the stillness, "You'll know soon enough." The day they returned, the sky was gray, heavy with the kind of clouds that promised rain. I imagined them stepping off the plane, tired but smug, their suitcases filled with souvenirs and their phones brimming with photographs of joy I was never meant to be part of. They would drive home expecting comfort, their familiar walls, their beds, the illusion of permanence. But when their car pulled into the driveway, the illusion shattered. The curtains were gone. The welcome mat had disappeared. Inside, the house echoed with emptiness. The furniture, the photos, the little luxuries Vanessa had boasted about, all of it was gone. What remained were bare walls and the hollow sound of their footsteps. Vanessa's voice rose first, sharp and shrill. "What happened?" Her heels clacked against the hardwood as she spun from room to room, opening closets that held nothing, slamming drawers that offered only dust. Michael followed, his voice rougher, angrier, as if volume alone could undo what had been done. "This is impossible," he muttered. "This was our house, ours." But he knew. I could see it in the way his face shifted when his eyes fell on the kitchen counter. There, propped against the backsplash, was a single envelope. His hands shook as he tore it open. Vanessa hovered over his shoulder, demanding answers before he even read them. The note was short, just one line, written in my steady hand. "The house was never yours. I only returned it to those who deserve it." Michael's lips moved silently as he read it again and again, his eyes darkening with every pass. Vanessa snatched the paper from him, her face twisting as if the words had struck her. "She can't do this," she hissed. "She can't." But I had. I watched from the sidewalk across the street, unseen in the shadow of a tree. I had come not to gloat, not to confront, but to witness the moment the truth settled on them, like a weight they could not shake. Their voices carried through the open door, harsh and desperate. The house that had once been their sanctuary now mocked them with its emptiness. There were no dramatic confrontations, no shouting match between mother and son. I did not step inside to claim victory. There was no need. The silence spoke louder than I ever could. Michael collapsed into a chair that wasn't there anymore, his body folding in on itself as realization struck. Vanessa stormed from room to room, her fury unable to change the fact that the walls no longer belonged to her. I stood there for a long moment, breathing in the cool air. My chest felt light, unburdened. There was no anger left, no burning need to punish, only release. I had cut the final tie, and in doing so, I had freed myself. It is strange how quiet victory can be. No applause, no recognition, just the sound of your own heart beating steady in your chest, stronger than it has in years. Have you ever wondered what you would do, standing on the edge of betrayal and freedom? Would you go back, or would you keep walking, leaving behind the wreckage others created? If it were you, would you turn around, or would you step forward like I did, without looking back? I watched them one last time, Michael with his head in his hands, Vanessa pacing like a trapped animal. They had gambled on my silence, and they had lost. I turned away. My steps were slow but certain, carrying me down the quiet street toward my new life. There was no part of me that longed to return, no sliver of regret. For the first time in decades, I wasn't defined by sacrifice or loss. I was defined by choice, my own. The rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, washing the dust from the sidewalks. I pulled my coat tighter and let it soak into me, cleansing, renewing. Behind me, the house stood stripped bare, no longer a monument to my sacrifices, but a lesson carved into wood and stone. Ahead of me, the city waited, unknown and unclaimed. I smiled to myself as I walked on, whispering the truth I had finally come to believe. Freedom doesn't always roar. Sometimes it whispers in the quiet after betrayal. Sometimes it looks like an old woman walking away, her back straight, her heart finally light. And I did not look back.